Hello and welcome to Forever Blues, your podcast for all things Birmingham City. My name's Neil Moxley, my co-host is Colin Tattham, and we'd like to say a great big thank you, as always, to Davison's Law for sponsoring this podcast. Better give a shout out as well to Drain Tech, AMG Logistics and Bewdley Spirits, because I failed to mention them at the end of the last one. Apologies to them, and thank you for bearing with us, and thank you for their support. Right, normally we preview football matches and look back on football matches, but today we're going to take a trip down memory lane. We've both been at sort of the heart of involved with what happened over the last 14-15 years to Birmingham City, both in a professional capacity and obviously as supporters of the football club. So we're going to get you through basically our memories, reminiscences, and generally speaking what happened during the 14-15 years that of Far East ownership that has just ended with Knights Head Capital's takeover of the football club. Quite frankly, when Colin was doing, and Colin has done the bulk of the research on this, looking through the timeline of it, it's absolutely crazy. I said to him yesterday that, you know, whether or not if we'd offered this up as a potential film script, no one would have taken it because it was too fanciful. And just reading the synopsis of what's taken place, I'm sure by the end of this you'll agree. So I'm going to set the scene and I'm going to set Colin off. Just for a bit of housekeeping, when the takeover happened, Colin was the Birmingham City correspondent for the Birmingham Mail. I was the Daily Mail's Midlands football correspondent, obviously with a keen interest on Blues, who were in the Premier League at the time. So I'm going to take you back to summer of 2007, Col, and what happened when David Sullivan and David Gold eventually decided to sell Birmingham City.
Yeah, I think it was in the July. I think there was a pre-season. I remember when the news came through that they'd agreed to sell 29.9% of the club for about 15 million quid to Carson Yeung. Obviously, none of us knew much about Carson Yeung. As things transpired, we learned a heck of a lot about him. But at that time, if you remember David Sullivan, the Gold brothers, I think a parting of the ways was probably the supporters wanted it. I think they were looking to move on, so it suited. That's the sort of background to it. It was the right time for them to sell up after 17 and a half years. Carson Yeung arrived on the scene. Obviously, amid big fanfare, 29.9%, and there was a backstop date to complete the rest of the takeover, which of course didn't happen. So you have to fast forward all the way to November 2009 until he actually took full control of Birmingham City Football Club, and it was valued at £81.5 million. I mean, the price that he ended up paying was probably 3 times the actual worth of the share value, which probably was a little bit of a precursor. In that period as well, I know that David Sullivan, the Gold brothers, Karen Brady, were trying to organise a new contract for Steve Bruce. That previous summer. That didn't materialise. It was apparently Carson Yeung and his people sort of put the block on that. So in the end, Steve Bruce walked out, went to Wigan Athletic. And then, you know, the Carson Yeung era ushered in. It was interesting, the very first press conference they had when they took the 29.9%, it was really low key. This is all a bit strange, that there was a language barrier. Carson Yeung didn't really say anything. It was left to William Chan, who was going to come in as the director. And you fast forward to 2009, there was a real transformation in Carson Yeung and everything about the people around him. I remember the staff at St Andrews all lined the stairs through the Cop reception and clapped him in. It was almost sort of presidential style as he sort of swept through the doors. It was a sort of cross between Bill Clinton meets Michael McIntyre. and the press conference itself, you know, everyone was excited. All of a sudden, after 17 and a half years of the previous regime, there was this guy from the Far East, this multi-millionaire, pledging, you know, 40 to 80 million pounds for team spending straight away. But everyone's like, "Well, that's good," and you think, "Okay." Anyway, let's let it pass. But in a nutshell, at that time, nobody was sort of complaining when 5-6 million was spent on Nicola Zigic and Ben Foster.
No.
Obviously, the club finished 9th, highest position in 51 years, and won the Carling Cup in 2011. So everybody thought, wow, this is, a bright new era. But I mean, what were your thoughts on when he sort of Carson Yeung first came in?
Yeah, I mean, I remember the press conference, the second one, quite vividly, because we got ushered into a room, which was one of the boxes post the press conference, to do sort of the daily nationals who'd turned up en masse to welcome in the latest money donor from the Far East, because it was all the rage. The takeovers were going on sort of all over the place at the time. And obviously the question on everybody's lips is how much money are you going to spend? How much money you got? Do you know what I mean? Which is, it's the old Jasper Carrot gag about why he never became a director again, wasn't it? It was basically, what people do is moan and say how much money you're going to spend. And he was right, because like Carson Yeung, that was pretty much where we were with him. But yeah, the initial sound bites we got back were, there was nothing really to see here. And then slowly, I remember the first sort of alarm bells ringing. It might even have been you, to be honest with you, when we were chatting, and you said that you bumped into our hierarchy going to a game at Middlesbrough, eating in a little chef. And I thought to myself, then I'm thinking, really? Is this, I mean, okay, they're new to the country and all the rest of it, and I don't want to say, I don't want to sound in any way, shape or form off in what I'm saying, but I did sort of take a step back and think, what are they really? So we're having the pre-match meals now.
Yeah, I suppose you've got to eat somewhere on the A19, I guess. I remember I was travelling up with Tom Ross, and it's like, isn't that the new owners? Yeah, so it was a bit odd, a bit odd. And
the other thing, sorry to touch, I remember speaking to Steve Bruce about it, and Steve off the record, and Steve sort of saying that one member of the pack had already tried to interfere with his team selection and make recommendations as to exactly what he should and shouldn't be doing with Stan Lazaridis. You sort of like, there's little signs that I'm not exactly sure this is going to pan out the way we all hope it might do.
Yeah, there was a lot of that, and I think Carson Yeung, like subsequent owners, was actually a football enthusiast. He was really almost like a fan, and I think his intentions initially were good.
Yeah,
and they just wanted to sort of enjoy the ride, but they didn't know what they were getting into, and obviously we didn't know what they had got into elsewhere. But in terms of that, yes, they had their certain views on football and the way it should be played and players. And I remember Sammy Yu came in as a vice chairman. He only lasted a year though, Sammy, but he had an office. He plonked himself at Wasthills at the training ground, and he was always in full kit.
Right, okay.
Right, and he chain smoked, and he would go out and watch training. And I always remember I was coming down to Wasthills, and as the players were coming down the steps from the pitches, if people know the setup, and I remember he stopped Cameron Jerome and pulled him aside, and basically tried to sort of manoeuvre his body to show him how to hold off a defender.
Right.
And so when Cameron was looking over him at me, I was looking in at him. We sort of looked at each other and went, okay. And Sam Yu was giving Cameron Jerome a lesson in how to sort of shield the ball.
Yeah.
So it's like there was a lot of that went on, and and of course his right hand man was the one and only Peter Panu, who came in as vice chairman initially, executive and finance, and then he became MD and chairman, which again another character very much like Sammy was, but he was very much Carson Yeung's right-hand man. And going back to the first press conference in 2007, I think I mentioned William Chan, who was going to be chairman. The second time round, when if you want, Grand Top, as the firm was, and Carson Yeung reappeared, they sort of gave a big meal in Chinatown from the media and certain other people. And basically, Peter, this is where we first came across Peter Panu.
Right.
You know, who's this new guy? And I always remember chatting to him. I said, hi, Peter, how are you? Introduced myself and everything. I said, where's William? As in William Chan, who was going to be the chairman. And he just went, we don't talk about William.
Okay.
And then just sort of walked off, and I was like, okay,
Right, okay.
Make of that what you will. I think he carried the can for the actual collapse of the takeover, not surging through and being a full takeover.
What, in the first instance?
In the first instance, yeah. So I think, but anyway, Peter Panu came in, and if you remember, they also brought Michael Dunford in, very experienced MD, CEO.
Yeah, got a very good record, Michael.
But him and Peter was like, two sheriffs in one town. So Michael
had to go.
went, and then, but like I said, on the pitch, there was unparalleled success. Let's not forget that. I mean, we can laugh and joke, and we know what happened in terms of Carson getting sent to prison. But at that time, there was unparalleled success.
Yeah, can I just say, was that the infamous Chinese meal? Because I'm pretty sure, and I'm sure you won't mind me mentioning this, Pete Colley was challenged to some sort of drinking.
No. It was pre-Christmas. Vico Hoy, who became the chairman after poor old William. I don't know where William is still. Basically, they took the team for a sort of bonding night out, and Vico Hoy challenged basically anyone to a drinking game.
Right, okay.
He met his match in Colin Doyle, Big Doyley,
yeah,
who necked a pint of lager in 2.5 seconds, if I remember. So as a result, he beat Vico Hoy, who therefore agreed to pay for the players' Christmas night out.
Oh right, that was generous of him.
That was the story behind that one. Yeah. So the owners, it
was all jolly japes at the time, wasn't
and there was
it?
a lot of largesse. They like that sort of thing. A lot of money was spent and maybe frittered. But as I said, on the pitch, let's not forget, Blues won the Carling Cup.
Oh, under Carson Yeung's stewardship. Yeah, absolutely.
What was the feeling like in the wider media, nationally, about him, the takeover, and what Birmingham City were doing there?
Yeah, I think there was a degree of excitement and a degree of scepticism as well, because there always is when you can't find, as we've later sort of became blindingly obvious, when there's no transparency over issues. I'm going to make this comparison because it's a valid one. Randy Lerner comes in to Aston Villa in 2006, a scion of the MBNA, credit card dynasty. People are looking at the family's net wealth, which was like 2.5 billion, and sort of saying, okay, he spent 63 million pounds on buying Aston Villa Football Club. We know his family's got money. There it is. You can't really ask any more questions because the pedigree and the financials and everything stacks up. When somebody comes in from the Far East, this isn't a point of a xenophobic point, it's just a point. There wasn't the same degree of publicly available information on Carson Yeung, where he got his wealth from.
There's a lot more mystery.
There was a lot more mystery, so people are going to be, naturally, newspapers, media organisations are going to be naturally a bit more sceptical. And of course then you've got anecdotal evidence of bits and pieces sort of eking out about, what may or may not be going on, managers not happy, managers being told which players to pick and what in which positions. But having said that, like you said, Alex McLeish, very sensible guy, managed to sort of navigate through those choppy waters and present on the face of it, a pretty united front. It was a fairly settled side, wasn't it, that we had at that sort of stage.
Very good team. Experienced as well with the quality to go with it.
Yeah, and when everything was going swimmingly well and we finished halfway up the league, there's obviously the spotlight's not that fierce because there's nothing. Effectively, Premier League clubs at that level are self-sustaining, so everything is fine. And it's only when, generally speaking, trouble starts flaring that it becomes issues, because all of a sudden the cash tap's turned off, and then somebody's got to make good the largesse or the contracts or the overspend or the shortfall or whatever it is, when clubs drop out of the top division. So I think initially, while there was scepticism about who Carson Yeung was and where he'd come from, while everything appeared to be on the face of it all fine and dandy, until I can have all the anecdotal evidence I want, and let's face it, the Chinese aren't the first, won't be the last to think they can meddle in the team affairs of a manager, but that, it was only started to unravel when relegation sort of started to hit.
Yeah, going back to there, a little bit of a red flag, but as you said, at that time, a lot of people, everyone was swept up in a new takeover. This is new and exciting. That Carson Yeung and Grand Top got a £57 million bridging loan from a lady called Pollyanna Chu, who she was part owner or owned a string of casinos in Macau.
Yeah.
So that might tell you something as well about where this may have been heading. But as you said, when things start going wrong on the pitch, and then there's more scrutiny off it, and of course after the Carling Cup success, relegation followed, and then within a month or so, Carson Yeung was arrested on money laundering charges. He was found guilty on 5 counts around money. I think it was between 50 and 70 million pounds, and he got sentenced to 6 years in prison.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So then, wow, the balloon goes up.
Yeah.
Catastrophic, wasn't it? And that obviously plunged the club into a massive period of uncertainty, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, it was a bit of a shame, really, because there was still a hangover of, I know it sounds ridiculous to sort of say, but there was still a bit of a feel-good factor around the place, because we got a European competition to look forward to. So, we had these, trips to Madeira. I'm still recovering from Bruges, to be quite honest with you. That was a great trip. And obviously, was it Slovakia or Slovenia, the other one? I can always get them two mixed up. Slovenia, yeah. Yeah, so there was still that, and they still had the remnants of a side that was capable, and under Chris Hughton, and one that did actually get into the playoffs. At the end of that first season. Here's a question for you, one we've not discussed off air either. Do you think the story would have been as bad had we gone up that season? Do you think the influx of money back into the Premier League, if we'd gone up, if we'd beaten Blackpool and then gone on to beat, was it Cardiff?
That's interesting. That's quite interesting. I think had Blues got promotion, don't think it really would have changed anything much. I think it probably would have postponed the inevitable of what was coming down the line.
Yeah.
Because the club was in a state of flux. The owner was behind bars, so it wouldn't have been a good situation. And there were obviously serious money issues, and there was as we know, that summer there was a huge fire sale of players. But it was, roller coaster. There were fun times, there were grim times. And again, the whole ethos with Carson Yeung, who went from being, a hairdresser to him saying he had a whole load of salons, to various different other diversifying different interests in energy, stocks, a newspaper. So it's not a bad,
not a bad portfolio.
No, it's not a bad acceleration from your core business. It was, chopping locks, as it were. And like I mentioned, when he brought Peter Pano in, again, he was mainly the public-facing figure for Carson Yeung, really. And obviously, Peter, again, another interesting character, fairly charismatic in his own way. But again, he will admit he didn't really know that much about football per se.
Yeah.
But he was just basically Carson Yeung's right-hand man.
Is it right that he asked you to help him?
No, I remember once we were out in Birmingham, just chit-chatting, and he more or less said, would you like a job?
Right, okay.
What do you mean? And like I said there, he said, well, he's not particularly au fait on football, the ways of the workings over there. So it was some sort of quasi-football advisor stroke sporting director role.
Oh, you could have been the Craig Gardner.
That's possibly, maybe I had an inkling of what that role might entail and who might get it. So I thought, I don't want to be like that. No, it was never an option. It's like, whilst, you're sort of flattered to a degree, it's like, are you sure about this? But no,
I mean, on the pitch, it was a strange one, wasn't it? Because, after Chris Hughton, we had Lee Clark, didn't we? Was it Lee Clark next?
Yeah.
I think it was Lee Clark next, yeah. And, in that first season, we were still quite competitive under him, weren't we?
Yeah, there was a nucleus of a good squad there, still, even though obviously a lot of players had to go. But as I said, it was clearing up that mess that had happened towards the end of the Young regime. Sorry, just to go completely back on a tangent. I mean, like I said, there was a lot of interesting, fun times, and the pre-season 2010 to Hong Kong and China was just something else. I went on behalf of the Birmingham Mail. It was a 10 to 12 day trip based in Hong Kong initially, then Beijing, and then elsewhere inland. And it was just bonkers. There was a game at the Bird's Nest Stadium, 80,000 people. Right. I think the Blues were the first English club to play there. And it was all about showing off Birmingham City to Hong Kong and China. Right. And the itinerary was mental. I remember there was one, we travelled on train actually, Shenyang I think it was in country, and it didn't get a flight or anything. Right. Went on a train, basically imagine getting the Avanti West Coast line. It was like that. Everyone was packed on. Right. People were standing up, and the players were like fuming. Oh right, okay. And it was, it's a stereotype. There was like people with chickens in cages and everything, and it was just crazy. And it was a 4-hour trip to get to this game on a train, just a public train. It was really chaotic. And then there was a visit to the Forbidden City, Great Wall of China, unbelievable. But it was a whistle stop one. Great Wall of China, unbelievable. Right. But everybody turned up in like flip-flops and like casuals, and it's like, right, okay. It's quite steep in parts and steps and everything. And then in the Forbidden City, I always remember this poor old guide. He was doing his best to try to keep everyone's interest. Few people were not that bothered. They're just like, okay. And then one person who shall remain unnamed, but you probably guess who it was, a Scottish striker. I remember that a chap was telling us about, the Ming dynasty, the palaces and everything. And he just went, bore off, mate, bore off. And I'm like, come on, this is like...
It wasn't James McFadden, was it?
No, a trip of a lifetime, come on, it was just, So, yeah, it was crazy, and another, sorry, just to ramble, these things are just sort of coming back to me, and obviously, Blues struck a deal with Xtep, a Chinese leisurewear firm, right? Sportswear firm, big over there, to be fair. Obviously, kit suppliers and everything, and they launched the kit over there. I think it was Kevin Phillips and a couple of the other lads, Scott Dan, had to sort of get up on podiums. And there's a big launch at a shopping centre, right? And then, as a treat, they closed their flagship store in Beijing for all the players and the staff to go. Right. And it was literally, if you like anything, take what you want. Right. Unfortunately, I've never seen anything like it. It was like an invasion of ants stripping the shelves bare. And honestly, and I think and I have to say, I've still got, a bit worse for wear, some Xtep trainers. They're still serving me well after all these years.
Well, that's an absolute feather in the cap for Xtep, isn't it?
They're good, actually, good quality. I'll give them that. But people were coming out with boxes loaded up and everything. Right. And I think I remember Mike Taylor, actually, he's probably still wearing some of the dodgy gear, actually. He got a heck of a lot of stuff at the time. Right, okay. It was as much as you could carry, was it? But it was a little bit embarrassing. The store was just stripped. It wasn't necessarily the Blues players and staff. It was Carson Yeung's sort of entourage. Oh, right, okay. They were like, literally, it was unbelievable. So... Yeah, I don't think that was a good idea. But again, that was part of the craziness, the roller coaster sort of thing it all was, and it was all not a pantomime, but it was all like, what is this all about?
What impression were you getting over there when you were there? Were you getting the impression that this is a bona fide operation, or were you getting the impression that this is very much fly by the seat of your pants, we're making it up as we go along?
Yes and no, because I remember trying to speak to the sort of MD of Xtep, and you couldn't get any sense out of them in terms of what are you getting out of this, why are you doing this, in effect, it's translated. In effect, it was, we're doing this because we think he's lucky.
What?
Yeah, and I was like, what do you mean? Well, they think Carson Yeung's a lucky guy. They think so. Yeah, we'll back him. But they're very superstitious, obviously, out in the Far East, etc. There's a lot of betting goes on, this, that, the other. And so they were thinking this guy's suddenly come from nowhere. He's got a football club in England. Yeah, well, this man's lucky. We want some of that. And that was part of a decision-making process, which tells you something in itself, doesn't it? So it's if
there's any Far East billionaires out there, I'm lucky as well.
There's a joke there, but I don't think I'm going to go.
No, don't please.
No, I don't think I'm going to go down there. But going back to the X step, that deal was, how shall we say, strange, because there was a clause in it whereby Blues would pay X step a certain amount of money to promote the club in Hong Kong and China, and shirt sales and brand awareness, etc., etc. But after relegation, Blues ended up paying X-Step more than X-Step were giving Blues in the sponsorship.
Well, how does that work then?
I don't know. And it turned out, when there was further investigation afterwards, when the dust had settled on the whole regime, that there was sort of agreements, how should we say, possibly off the books.
Right.
That there were, whereby certain people at the club had done sort of deals direct with X-Step.
Right, okay.
And unsurprisingly, that whole agreement was eventually ripped up.
Right.
But my X-Step trainers are still
working. That's good news. That's good news. I mean, going back to the club. I mean, obviously, after it all started, all really unravelled, didn't it, and culminated in that, never to be forgotten afternoon at the Reebok Stadium. I was actually driving to Everton and listening to the radio, and obviously they were doing updates, every 5 minutes. You were living it, obviously, because you were there. My brother had a massive bet on Blues to go down.
Okay.
So, and he didn't know whether to laugh or cry in the away end. Although I'm pretty sure he was happy it didn't happen. But I just wonder, really. I mean, was there a feeling at the end of that? I know you gave your impassioned sort of like video message to the cameras, sort of saying this can't be allowed to happen again. But was there a feeling then that a line was going to be drawn under it, or did you actually think in your heart of hearts we were going to get more of the same?
No, nobody knew, and anyone who says to the contrary, you don't believe them, because had Blues got relegated that day, I still think it would have been Armageddon for the club. Right. I really do. And at that time, if you remember, that BIHL, which was Grand Top Carson Yeung's takeover vehicle, the firm, had basically voluntary receivership, and it was being run by Ernst & Young, and that's when Panos Pavlakis was first coming onto the scene. And so, and it was basically the club was run by Panos, Julia Shelton, Roger Lloyd, John Alsop, and a good senior management team that were making sure that the club kept their head above water. Yeah. Because there was so much infighting going on in Hong Kong and China. Obviously, Carson Yeung, the scenario, he was on his way out, and eventually, the club did change hands into TTA, Trillion Trophy Asia. Yeah. But it wasn't a case of, they've finally sold the club and there's a new sheriff in town who's got a load of money, who's going to write this and everything. You just felt this seems more of the same. Yeah, I mean, I went to do it was that after that season, it was Lee Clark's final sort of hurrah, wasn't it? And then before Gary Rowett came in, I remember doing a pre-season bit with Lee. Went and had a cup of coffee with him, and he basically, told us how much financial pressure he was under to try and put a team together. I'm pretty sure the maximum wage at the time was $5,000 a week, apart from the outstanding liabilities they got to honour Nikola Zigic's contract, which was killing the club. I mean, it was hurting the club badly. Listen, you enter into a contract with someone, you've got to pay them. End of story. That's football. That's it. End of. But Lee was basically saying, I've got this bundle of money,
and I've got to put, and nobody's on more than £5 grand. I remember him sort of saying, if you've got any players that you want to loan out, if you want them to get, play under pressure, play for a decent club, come send them to me, if in effect. And it sort of it obviously culminated in the deer of that Bournemouth game. Obviously Lee had gone by then, but and then sort of Gary Rowett came in and tried to make sense of the madness, and I still think he did a pretty underrated job while it was all still kicking off, and obviously before the club changed hands again. Carson Yeung sold it to Trillion Trophy Asia.
Yeah, like you said, in fairness, looking back on the background, it was a tough job to have, following Chris Hughton. Chris Hughton, I always remember, I think I said this to you before, and I've mentioned this before, when he left, he knew what he was doing. He said, I think it's going to get worse before it gets better here.
Right.
That was a real big chance to try to get back into the Premier League that season, and then he up sticks and left, and recommended Lee Clark, who was our youngest manager for donkey's years. It was a tough gig, and there was still so much uncertainty going on out in the Far East, in Hong Kong and China. Even though Carson effectively, was doing time, he was sort of still hovering, and he still wanted to be sort of part of it. But eventually, when TTA came in, there was a line drawn under there, and it was interesting because I mentioned Panos Pavlakis came in. He was part of BIHL, and then worked with Ernst & Young to sort of bring Paul Schwen to the table. I mean, he was the figurehead for about 3 years at the club as MD. What were your thoughts, and how did you get on with him?
Well, interestingly, just to give people a bit of a backstory, it was obviously clearly going to go badly wrong. And I still remember where I was. I was in the shower and I sort of had an epiphany back in November 2012. And I thought, surely to God, there must be somebody out there who can rescue this football club. And so I basically asked at the goal zone, asked his lordship. I said, look, I pulled him to one side one day and said, look, there must be somebody out there who's got enough cash to make a difference. And we had a couple of meetings. It's been detailed in Daniel Irie's excellent book, about, which chronicles the machinations of what went on in the Far East. It's an unbelievable read, really. But I sort of made sort of overtures to this person. I better not name, but it is in there. And they basically sort of entered into conversations with the Blues to buy the football club. And we always remember we went into the super box, as it were, with Roger Lloyd, bless him.
12, I think.
Yeah, and Mike Wiseman, and obviously the individuals concerned, army of lawyers and accountants and whatever. And it was up for grabs for about 13 million quid. And I genuinely thought, that something was going to happen, and whatever happened, it was on Peter Panu's watch. There was a meeting thereafter with Panos in London, which it was discussed again, but unfortunately nothing ever came of it. And to be honest with you, with Panos, I quite liked the guy. To be perfectly frank, I know we had a mad row on Twitter, and I think drinking might have been taken at his end. And
didn't he describe you as a normal nobody?
He described me as a normal nobody, which is one of the nicer things that people associated with Birmingham City Football Club have said about me over the years. But I remember going I went down and met him in London, and we were talking about the potential, the club changing hands still. I quite liked him. I mean, under normal, I mean, he wasn't the worst, sort of guy to get involved. I ever saw get involved with the football club. To be perfect, I always felt his heart was in the right place. I'm not going to forget that spat. He deserved everything he got on Twitter, quite frankly, and I won't forgive him. I don't care what he says, for engineering the dismissal or otherwise of Gary Rowett, because it was completely. I know you may have got a different view on it, but it was akin to me to sticking a loaded revolver to your head and pulling the pin, particularly as that group of players are being asked to play an expansive group, expansive style of football that they were just incapable of. I mean, that was the top and bottom. Unless you're going to spend massive money on a group of players that can, that can do it, they were just never that team. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Gary had got a good handle on it, and I've spoken to him off the record about it, since then. And Gary's sort of take was, if they'd come to me in the sort of like in mid second half of November and said, what do you need to do to get into the playoffs? And I would have said, I need this player and that player. Then at the end of the season, if it had failed, they could have got rid of me. As it was, they were trying to run too quickly, too fast, too quickly. And it was just, and like I say, so Panos' fingerprints, whether or not it was Dick Tatt was handed down from those above him, I don't know. And the top and bottom of it is, with that sort, I wouldn't say that soured my relationship with him, but because it didn't. But it did sort of sour my opinion of him and what was going on at the time.
Yeah, I think with Panos, he was more of a football man. Loves his football.
I'll give him that.
Yeah, and I think what he did well in the sort of 3 years, he was sort of like the acceptable front of the club again, and he did engage with people and fans. But he also let the people at the club get on with what they were good at. Didn't interfere.
Right.
Like I mentioned, Julia Shelton, Roger Lloyd, Gary Moore, John Allsop, just get on with running the club, and he would do the other thing and handle the stuff out in the Far East and China. And interesting, you mentioned that about the whole. He was MD, I think, when Gary Rowett was dismissed. 2 months prior to that, that was when there was a board change. That's when TTA had firmly got their feet under the table. So there were new diktats from new directors, basically. And so although he sort of carried the can for it, you had new people in there. And by this stage, you had Mr. Zhao, Wenqing Zhao, who's the chairman. Edward Zenkat was there. I always remember Edward actually, fast forwarding a little bit, when Gianfranco Zola finally sort of fell on his sword. He was sort of in tears. We went to see him at the time. He felt it so much. So there was a new broom coming in then. So I'll excuse Panos a little bit from it, but he was the first point of call with the manager at the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was, a very, that was probably a watershed when TTA came in. Paul Schwen, as I said, the king of the penny stocks, was the figurehead, but really, there was another hand behind the tiller of the firm, which changed the name to Birmingham Sports Holdings, BSHL, and as we know, that sort of really began to accelerate after Gary Rowett's dismissal and Gianfranco Zola coming in.
Just want to say that during that time, I don't think proper credit has ever been given to the people who were running the football club and the power behind the throne and all the people who effectively made sure behind the scenes that the largesses, the excesses, the faux pas, whatever you want to call it, of the leadership, of the ownership, didn't actually make Birmingham City appear as much of a basket case as it actually was. So the likes of Julia Shelton, Roger Lloyd in particular, obviously the club secretary and the FD, and Gary Moore, obviously on the finance side of things, and then you've got Joe Allsop as well, and and Mike Wiseman. Mike's was in the background. I don't think I know he doesn't want the accolades, but he should get them because he has managed to basically be the sort of, while he was there, you were quite sure that nothing was, real bad was going to happen. Do you know what I mean? And I think that, I feel quite strongly about it actually, that the contribution of these people shouldn't be forgotten. But I think it's probably a good time to call quits on this particular episode of the podcast. I just want to say grateful thanks to obviously Davison's Law, Drain Tech, AMG Logistics and Bewley Spirits for the continued support. And we'll see you all for part 2, where the plot incredibly thickens still further. So thanks very much for being with us, and we'll see you all on the other side. Keep on.